History remembers Christopher Columbus arriving in America, but what about the motherfuckers who were already building it thousands of years before he got here? Archaeologist James Ford was studying aerial photographs of northeastern Louisiana when something became visible from the air that was almost impossible to appreciate while standing on the ground. The landscape had geometry. Huge curved ridges stretched across the earth in a deliberate pattern, surrounding an enormous open space. Nearby were massive artificial mounds. This wasn't some forgotten little settlement where archaeologists found a few arrowheads. Human beings had physically redesigned the landscape. Today, we call it Poverty Point. And immediately, Columbus starts becoming fucking useless as a starting point because people began constructing Poverty Point roughly 3,700 years ago, more than 3,000 years before Columbus reached the Caribbean. The people who built it were indigenous people whose lives were based largely around hunting, fishing, and gathering wild resources. No giant agricultural state has been identified behind Poverty Point. No obvious king has emerged from the archaeology. Yet somehow these communities organized one of the largest monumental construction projects in North America of its time. And nothing demonstrates that problem better than Mound A. Mound A still rises roughly 70 feet above the landscape and contains about 8.4 million cubic feet of earth. People move that earth by hand, load after load. Archaeologists can still see individual loads in the mound, and elsewhere at Poverty Point, they've even found basket impressions preserved in the clay. However they carried every load, Louisiana archaeologists estimate the scale of Mound A at the equivalent of roughly 15.5 million basket loads. At first, that number didn't completely break my brain, because I can still imagine generations doing it. Grandpa dumped some dirt, Dad dumped some dirt. Eventually, you've got a fucking mound. Then archaeologists looked at how Mound A was actually constructed. The dirt barely had time to weather. Researchers examined the layers, soil cores, and even microscopic boundaries between individual loads and found almost no evidence of erosion or soil forming between them. In a part of Louisiana where going months without significant rain would be unusual, the main construction appears to have happened in roughly 90 days or less. So much for generations slowly piling dirt onto the same fucking mound. Somehow, enough people converged here and coordinated their labor well enough to move millions of loads of earth in approximately the length of a summer. And normally, something built on that scale gives us somebody powerful to point at, a ruler, an elite class, somebody whose wealth or authority helps explain how that many people ended up working toward the same goal. Poverty Point hasn't conveniently given us one. Archaeologists haven't identified a king, a ruling dynasty, or the king of obvious elite burials that might tell us who controlled the place. In fact, no known indigenous burials have been found at Poverty Point at all. That doesn't mean nobody was in charge, and it doesn't mean everyone here was equal. It means whatever organized these people hasn't left us the easy answer we'd expect from something this fucking big. And the people weren't just showing up, moving dirt, and disappearing. Archaeologists have found hearths, pits, earth ovens, post holes, and huge concentrations of artifacts along Poverty Point's ridges. Evidence suggests hundreds of people may have lived here year-round, while the population could grow as other people arrived. And apparently, they were arriving from a long fucking way away. Poverty Point sits in a part of Louisiana where useful stone is scarce, yet more than 70 tons of non-local stone and minerals eventually made their way here. Some minerals can be traced to sources hundreds of miles away, including the Ozark Mountains, the Ohio and Tennessee River valleys, and even the Appalachian region. So whatever Poverty Point was, it wasn't isolated. People, materials, or both were moving across enormous distances, and suddenly the bayou sitting directly beside the site became a lot more interesting. If you're building a place where distant people and materials converge without roads, trucks, horses, or trains, suddenly waterfront property looks pretty fucking attractive. Bayou Mason connected Poverty Point to a much larger system of waterways, and in a world without highways, those rivers could move people and cargo across enormous distances. Archaeologists have even recovered artifacts from sediment dredged out of the bayou itself. But there's a problem with trying to reconstruct what was moving through that network. We're mostly finding what survived. Stone, clay, and copper can last thousands of years. Most of what people ate, wore, carried, or traded can't. That doesn't mean those things were being traded here. It means when we find tons of material arriving at Poverty Point and can't identify some equally obvious pile of payment traveling in the opposite direction, we can't assume there wasn't one. Time got to decide which half of the transaction we were allowed to find. That leaves us with a pretty strange picture. People are coming to Poverty Point. Enormous amounts of material are moving with them, and whatever was happening here was important enough to keep drawing people back. And when they got here, they weren't just building mounds. At the center of Poverty Point is an open plaza covering roughly 43 miles. Even that wasn't simply an empty patch of land they happened to build around. People filled low areas, maintained the surface, and deliberately shaped it into the landscape. Then archaeologists started finding enormous post holes underneath it. They've identified evidence for at least 36 huge timber circles, some stretching roughly 200 feet across. These posts weren't just left here until they disappeared. Evidence from excavated holes suggested at least some were deliberately pulled out. The holes were filled, and new circles were eventually built. So these people weren't just investing ridiculous amounts of effort into creating permanent monuments. They were building things they apparently intended to take apart, and that changes the value of the construction itself. Because archaeologists Tristram Kidder and Tristram Sherwood have argued that at Poverty Point, focusing only on what the finished earthworks were for may miss part of what was happening. The actual process of building them may have served social and religious purposes of its own. There are some other clues pointing towards Poverty Point as a place where gathering itself mattered. Millions of fired clay cooking objects have been recovered from the site, and archaeologist Christopher Hayes has argued that the amount of cooking evidence, combined with the monumental setting and other remains, is consistent with periodic ritualized feasting. Now the people moving all that dirt don't look quite as much like a construction crew. They're living here, other people are arriving, materials are traveling enormous distances, food is being prepared, huge timber circles are being built, removed and built again. And somewhere in all of that, I think the question of what everybody was getting for doing this starts to change. And I think this is where my modern brain keeps trying to turn Poverty Point into a job site. Somebody organized the work, so somebody must have been paying for it. And if nobody was paying, then somebody powerful must have been forcing people to do it. But those aren't the only reasons people work together. If I spend months working so I can afford a trip to Jamaica, I separate those two things in my head. The work is what I have to do, Jamaica is what I get for doing it. And I know Jamaica is an option because I live in a world where practically every experience on the planet can compete for my attention from a screen in my pocket. People coming to Poverty Point didn't live in that world. What they knew came from the places they'd been, the people they'd met, the things that traveled between communities, and the stories passed down to them. So traveling these waterways, meeting people from hundreds of miles away, bringing materials back, gathering around food, and helping build something their families believed mattered. May not have been the shit standing between them and the reward. It may have been part of the reward, and we can't prove that. Poverty Point didn't leave us an explanation. Archaeologists are still arguing over exactly what happened here and why. None of this means leadership, obligation, status, or exchange weren't involved. But if you ever stand on those ridges at Poverty Point and look across this place, you're probably going to wonder the same thing I did. What the hell convinced people to build all of this? Maybe that's the part we've been getting backwards. Maybe the reward wasn't waiting somewhere beyond Poverty Point. Maybe we're looking for the compensation while standing on it. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. My name's Chris. Thank you for your time. I will see you on the next one. Let's go.